The spring breeze carried the sweet scent of cherry blossoms through the air as Rose Chen stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting her pearl necklace. At 42, she never thought she'd be planning her second wedding, yet here she was, about to marry a man who seemed to have walked straight out of her dreams. The last 5 years as a single mom hadn't been easy, but she built a thriving real estate business from scratch while raising her teenage daughter, Lily. The doorbell's cheerful chime interrupted her thoughts. "Mom, David's here." Lily's voice echoed up the stairs, carrying a hint of the skepticism she'd shown since Rose had first started dating him 8 months ago. Rose couldn't blame her daughter. After all, Lily had been there through the tough times, watching her mom piece their life back together after the divorce. David Anderson appeared perfect on paper: successful investment banker, charitable foundation board member, and somehow still single at 45. He'd walked into her office looking to buy a luxury penthouse, and within minutes, they'd clicked over their shared love of cooking shows and 80s music. Their first date turned into weekly dinners, which evolved into family game nights with Lily, and before Rose knew it, David had become a constant presence in their lives. "You look beautiful," David said, appearing in her doorway. His steel gray suit matched his salt and pepper hair perfectly, and those kind brown eyes still made her heart skip a beat. He held up a small velvet box. "I got something for my future stepdaughter." Rose watched as he headed downstairs to give Lottie the gift, a delicate silver bracelet that matched the engagement ring he'd given Rose. It was these thoughtful gestures that had gradually won Lily over, or at least seemed to. The teenager had gone from barely acknowledging David's presence to helping him plan surprise birthday parties for Rose. In the kitchen, Rose found them laughing over breakfast preparations. David was attempting to flip pancakes while Lily recorded his failed attempts on her phone, both of them covered in flour. These moments made Rose's heart swell. Her daughter finally having a father figure who showed up, who cared, who made an effort. But relationships built on the foundation of past heartbreak are often equipped with hidden alarm systems, and Rose couldn't ignore the occasional warning bells. Like the way David smoothly changed topics whenever someone asked about his childhood, or how he never seemed to have photos from before 3 years ago. She brushed these thoughts aside, chalking them up to pre-wedding jitters and her own trust issues. The wedding venue, Pine Grove Country Club, was already booked for next month. Rose had thrown herself into the planning, perhaps to distract from the whispered voices of doubt in her head. The guest list was modest, just 60 people, mostly her close friends and real estate colleagues. David had insisted on keeping it intimate, claiming his family was small and scattered across the country. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table discussing wedding details, Lily seemed unusually quiet. Rose caught her daughter studying David when he wasn't looking, her expression unreadable. Was it normal teenage moodiness or something more? The question lingered in Rose's mind as she cleared the dishes. Later, while David was taking a business call in the study, Lily approached Rose in the kitchen. "Mom, are you really sure about all this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Rose could answer, David returned, all smiles and wedding talk, and the moment slipped away like water through fingers. As Rose lay in bed that night, she thought about how life had a way of offering second chances when you least expected them. David's proposal had come on a regular Tuesday evening while they were walking through the neighborhood park. No fancy restaurant, no elaborate sit-up, just a simple question asked under a sky full of stars. It felt real, unpretentious, perfect. The wedding countdown had begun, 32 days until she would become Mrs. Anderson. The invitations were sent, the flowers were ordered, and her dress hung in her closet like a white flag of surrender to love. Rose drifted off to sleep, unaware that her daughter was still awake, her mind racing with questions that would soon unravel everything they thought they knew about the man who had so perfectly woven himself into their lives. 2 weeks before the wedding, Lily sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by college brochures and her chronology textbook. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across her room as she tried to focus on her homework, but her mind kept drifting to the strange phone call she'd overheard earlier that day. She'd been helping David organize wedding favors in the living room when his phone rang. The moment he checked the caller ID, his usual warm smile vanished. He'd stepped onto the back porch, closing the door behind him, but Lily could still see him through the kitchen window. His shoulders were tense, his free hand clenched into a fist as he spoke in hushed tones. That account was supposed to be closed. She'd heard him snap before he noticed her watching and walked further into the garden. When he returned 15 minutes later, he was all smiles again, explaining it away as a stressful work call about market fluctuations. But something about his explanation felt rehearsed, like a script he prepared in advance. It wasn't just the phone call. Little things had been adding up over the past few days. While helping him move some boxes into their garage, she'd found an old wallet stuffed behind a shelf. Inside was a gym membership card with David's photo, but a different name. When she'd asked him about it, he'd laughed it off, saying it was a running joke from his college days when he and his friends would swap IDs at parties. The explanation made sense, but his laugh hadn't reached his eyes. Lily pulled out her laptop and opened a document she'd started titled Wedding To-Do List. But instead of cake flavors and seating arrangements, it contained a growing list of inconsistencies she'd noticed about her future stepfather. Like how he claimed to have played college football at Stanford, but when Mom's friend mentioned being there during the same years, David quickly changed the subject. Or how he never seemed to receive mail at their house, despite living there for the past 3 months. Her best friend Kai worked part-time at the local library and had access to newspaper archives. I know it sounds crazy, Lily had told him during lunch break at school, but something feels off. Could you help me look into David's background? That evening during family dinner, Lily watched David charm her mom with stories about his latest charity golf tournament. He was good at that, making people feel special, included, valued. Maybe that's why it had taken her so long to notice the cracks in his perfect facade. Like how his stories never included specific names or dates, or how he deflected personal questions by asking others about themselves. After dinner, while loading the dishwasher, Lily overheard another phone call. This time, David was speaking Chinese, a language he'd never mentioned knowing. When she asked about it later, he claimed it was a business associate teaching him basic phrases for an upcoming deal. But his pronunciation had been too perfect for a beginner. That night, she couldn't sleep. The ceiling fan spun lazily above her bed as she scrolled through David's social media profiles for the 100th time. Everything before 3 years ago was vague. No tagged photos, no specific locations, just generic business quotes and stock images. For someone who claimed to have been a social butterfly in college, his digital footprint was suspiciously light. Her phone buzzed with a text from Kai. Found something interesting in the archives. Meet me before school tomorrow. Lani glanced at her mom's room across the hall, where she could hear her humming while getting ready for bed. The sound made her heart ache. Her mom had been through so much after Dad left, and she'd finally found happiness again. What if Lily was wrong about David? What if her suspicions were just leftover trust issues from watching her parents' marriage fall apart? But she couldn't shake the memory of David's face when he'd received that phone call. It was like watching a mask slip for just a moment, revealing something darker underneath. The same expression had flashed across his face last week when Mom mentioned wanting to combine their bank accounts after the wedding. Lily opened her criminology textbook to the chapter they'd been studying on identity theft and fraud. Professor Chen's words from last week's lecture echoed in her mind. The most successful con artists don't just steal your money, they steal your trust first. As she finally drifted off to sleep, her dreams were filled with wedding bells that sounded more like warning sirens, and a growing certainty that tomorrow's meeting with Kai would change everything. The morning sun hadn't even risen when Lily pulled into the library parking lot, spotting Kai's beaten-up Honda already waiting. Her hands were shaking slightly as she grabbed her backpack, filled with notebooks and the mysterious wallet she'd found in the garage. The air was crisp, and the library windows were still dark except for the soft glow from the research room. "You need to see this," Kai whispered as soon as she walked in, not even bothering with a hello. His usually playful face was serious as he pulled up several newspaper archives on the computer screen. "I started with the investment firms David claimed to work for. Guess what? No record of him. Not even a mention in their newsletters or annual reports." Lily's stomach tightened as she pulled out her notebook. For the past week, she'd been documenting everything. Times of suspicious phone calls, inconsistencies in David's stories, the way his accent sometimes slipped when he was angry. "Show me everything," she said, pulling up a chair. They spent the next hour digging through databases, cross-referencing dates and names. The prestigious Harvard MBA David bragged about. The alumni database showed no graduate matching his description from that year. The charity foundation he claimed to run? It existed, but under completely different leadership. Look at this, Kai said, pointing to an article from 5 years ago. It was about a charity gala in Seattle. In the background of one photo, barely visible, was a man who looked remarkably like David, but the caption listed a different name. Robert Mitchell, Lily read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. During her free period at school, Lily called the Seattle newspaper, pretending to be doing research for a school project about charitable giving. The reporter who wrote the article remembered the gala well, and Robert Mitchell even better. "Oh, that guy," the reporter said, his voice turning cold. "He disappeared right after the gala. So did $300,000 of donation money." Lily barely heard her teachers that day, her mind racing with possibilities. During lunch, she sat alone in the library, creating a timeline on her laptop. David Anderson's social media presence began 3 years ago. Robert Mitchell vanished 5 years ago. Between those 2 points was a 2-year gap she couldn't account for. That afternoon, while everyone else headed to sports practice, Lily visited Professor Chen in her office. Without revealing too many details, she asked about identity theft cases she'd studied. The most dangerous predators, her professor explained, are the ones who take their time. They don't just steal identities, they create entirely new ones, building trust over months or even years. The professor's words haunted her as she drove home, nearly missing her turn when she spotted David's car parked outside the bank, the same bank where her mom kept all her real estate business accounts. Through the window, she could see him chatting with the manager, that same charming smile he always wore. Back in her room, Lily started a new document, this time listing everything they knew about David that could be verified. The list was frighteningly short. His job? No one had ever visited his office. His family? Always too busy or too far away to visit. His past? A collection of perfect stories that somehow left out all the important details. Her phone buzzed, a text from Kai. He'd found something in an old police bulletin. A series of investment scams targeting successful single mothers. The victims all described the same pattern. A charming businessman, a whirlwind romance, and a disappearing act right after gaining access to their accounts. Lily's hands trembled as she opened her mom's wedding planning binder. Inside was a copy of the marriage license application. David's signature looked practiced, too perfect, like someone who had signed many different names before. Next to it was a sticky note with her mom's bank account numbers for the honeymoon arrangements, David had said. The sun was setting when she heard David's car pull into the driveway. From her window, she watched him get out, carrying roses for her mom, always the perfect gentleman. But now she saw it differently. Every gesture calculated, every smile measured, every story designed to draw them in deeper. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from the Seattle reporter, containing more photos from the charity gala. As they loaded on her screen, Lily's blood ran cold. There he was, David or Robert, or whatever his real name was, standing next to a woman who looked eerily similar to her mom. The caption mentioned she was a successful business owner. An internet search revealed she'd filed for bankruptcy 6 months later. Lily closed her laptop as she heard her mom's delighted laughter downstairs, probably reacting to the roses. The sound made her heart ache. With less than 2 weeks until the wedding, she knew she had to find concrete proof, and fast. But as she looked at the growing pile of evidence on her desk, a more terrifying question emerged. What would David do when he realized she knew the truth? The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, but Lily's hands wouldn't stop shaking as she helped set up the flower arrangements at Pine Grove Country Club. The grand ballroom sparkled with morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, catching the crystal centerpieces her mom had spent months picking out. Everything looked perfect, too perfect, just like David's carefully constructed lies. "Hey, your phone's been buzzing." Annie, the wedding planner, handed Lily her phone. 3 missed calls from Kai, and an urgent email marked with a red exclamation point. Lily's heart jumped into her throat as she stepped into a quiet corner to read it. Found more articles, Kay's email began. Different names, same face. Boston 2019, Michael Thompson. Chicago 2020, William Parker. Each time, he targeted successful businesswomen. Each time, he disappeared just after getting access to their accounts. Some victims lost everything. Police reports attached. Call me ASAP. The attached photos made her blood run cold. There he was, David or Michael or William, in various society page photos spanning the last 5 years. Different names, different cities, but always the same pattern: charitable events, business functions, engagement announcements, and always standing beside successful women who later reported devastating financial losses. Lily? We need help with the place cards, Annie called out. Lily quickly pocketed her phone, trying to keep her face neutral as she walked back to the main table. Through the window, she could see guests starting to arrive, their cars filling the parking lot. Her mom was upstairs in the bridal suite, probably slipping into her dream wedding dress right now. The weight of what she knew pressed down on her chest like a stone. In less than 2 hours, her mom would walk down that aisle, legally binding herself to a man who had destroyed other women's lives. But if Lily spoke up now, would anyone believe her? David had spent months charming everyone, the family, their friends, even their neighbors. Who would take the word of a teenager over such a perfect gentleman? Her phone buzzed again, another message from Kai. This time, it was a link to a federal law enforcement bulletin. The photo was grainy but unmistakable. David, under yet another name, was wanted for questioning in connection with a series of sophisticated investment frauds across multiple states. Lily's hands trembled as she helped arrange the last of the place cards. She put one at every table, each printed with David's name. A name she now knew was as fake as everything else about him. The guest book sat open nearby, and she noticed his distinctive signature, the same one she'd seen practiced over and over in different variations in the articles Kai had found. Through the ballroom doors, she caught a glimpse of David arriving, looking perfectly groomed in his tuxedo. He was chatting with the photographer, probably spinning another one of his carefully crafted stories, the same charm that had fooled everyone, including her mom, for so long. 10 minutes until the ceremony, Annie announced, checking her clipboard. The string quartet was setting up in the corner, and the officiant had just arrived. Soon, the doors would open, and guests would fill these seats to witness what they thought was a beautiful love story. Lily's phone buzzed one final time. It was an email from the Seattle reporter she'd contacted earlier, just confirmed with sources. Your guy matches the description of someone the FBI's been tracking. Multiple identities, multiple victims. Tell your mom to check her accounts now. Her chest tightened as she remembered last week's conversation, David convincing her mom to add him to her business accounts just in case anything happened. The papers were sitting in the lawyer's office, ready to be filed right after the ceremony. The wedding planner's voice echoed through the hall. Places everyone. We're starting in 5 minutes. Guests began filing into their seats. The string quartet started their first piece, and upstairs, Lily knew her mom was probably taking one last look in the mirror, ready to start her new life. Time seemed to slow down as Lily stood there, her thumb hovering over the number for local police she'd saved in her phone. If she was wrong about this, she'd ruin the happiest day of her mom's life. But if she was right and did nothing, she'd be watching her mom walk straight into a trap. The wedding march began to play softly, a practice run for the musicians. Through the window, Lily saw David step out into the hallway, adjusting his tie in a mirror. For a split second, his eyes met hers in the reflection, and she saw something flicker across his face. Recognition, maybe, or concern. He knew. Somehow, he knew that she had figured it out. In that moment, Lily realized she was out of time. Whatever she was going to do, it had to be now. Her mom's entire future hung in the balance, and the weight of that responsibility felt overwhelming. But as she looked around the room at all the smiling faces, the beautiful decorations, and thought about the ugly truth behind it all, she knew there was only one choice she could make. The bridal suite door felt impossibly heavy as Lily pushed it open. Her mom was stunning in her wedding dress, surrounded by friends helping with last-minute adjustments. The happiness radiating from her face made what Lily had to do next even harder. "Mom," Lily's voice cracked. "I need to talk to you." "Alone. It's important." The urgency in her tone must have shown on her face because her mom immediately nodded, asking everyone to give them a minute. "Sweetie, what's wrong?" "You're shaking," her mom said, taking Lily's trembling hands in hers. The familiar smell of her mom's perfume brought tears to Lily's eyes. "I need to show you something before you go downstairs." Lily pulled out her phone, opening the folder of evidence she'd compiled. "David isn't who he says he is. He's been lying to us, to everyone." The next 5 minutes felt like hours as Lily showed her mom everything. The newspaper articles, the police bulletins, the photos of other women he targeted. Her mom's face grew paler with each swipe of the screen, her hands gripping the back of a chair for support. "This can't be right," her mom whispered, but Lily could see the doubt creeping into her eyes. He wouldn't. A knock at the door interrupted them. "It's David. Can I come in? I want to see my beautiful bride before the ceremony." Lily's mom's eyes widened in panic, but before she could respond, the door swung open. David stood there in his tuxedo, his practiced smile freezing when he saw Lily's phone in her mom's hands, the incriminating photos clearly visible on the screen. "I can explain," he started, but his voice had changed. The warm, fatherly tone was gone, replaced by something colder, more calculated. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "How many other names have you used?" Lily's mom asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "How many other women have you done this to?" David's charm vanished completely. His eyes darted between them, then to the window, like a cornered animal looking for escape routes. "You don't understand. This isn't what you think." "Really?" Lily pulled up another article on her phone. "Like you didn't understand when Mary Wilson in Boston lost her entire retirement fund? Or when Patricia Chen in Chicago had to sell her business?" A flash of anger crossed his face. "You've been investigating me. You're just a kid. Who's going to believe you over me?" He took a step toward Lily, but her mom moved between them. "I believe her," her mom said firmly. "And I'm calling the police." David's mask cracked completely. "You're not calling anyone." He lunged for her mom's phone, but Lily was faster. She'd already pressed the venue's panic button, a security feature Annie had shown her during setup. "Security's already on their way," Lily said, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "And the FBI agent I spoke to this morning is probably here too. They've been tracking you across 3 states. David's face contorted with rage. He grabbed Lily's arm, but her mom shoved him back with surprising strength. "Don't you dare touch my daughter." The sound of running footsteps in the hallway made David spin around. His confident facade crumbled as reality set in. His perfect plan was falling apart. "You could have had it all," he snarled at Lily's mom. "We could have been happy. Your daughter had to ruin everything, just like a spoiled little brat." "The only thing my daughter ruined was your chance to steal everything I've worked for." Her mom shot back, her voice shaking with anger. "Every penny I earned, every client relationship I built, you were going to take it all, weren't you?" David's laugh was hollow. "You made it so easy, all of you do. So desperate for the perfect man, the perfect family. You never even questioned why someone like me would want a ready-made family with a teenager in tow." The door burst open as security rushed in, followed by hotel staff and several wedding guests who'd heard the commotion. David's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape route, but he was surrounded. "Mom?" Lily's voice wavered. "Are you okay?" Her mom pulled her close, their arms wrapping around each other. They watched as David's shoulders slumped in defeat, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. Through the window, they could see police cars arriving, their lights flashing against the country club's elegant facade. The perfect wedding was ruined, but something more important had been saved: their future, their trust, and most importantly, their bond as mother and daughter. Annie appeared in the doorway, her face a mix of shock and concern. "The police are here. And there are some FBI agents who'd like to speak with you." As they watched security lead David away, Lily's mom squeezed her hand. "How did you know?" she whispered. "How did you figure it all out?" Lily thought about all the little clues, the inconsistencies, the gut feelings she'd almost ignored. "Because I love you, Mom. And love makes you pay attention to things that don't add up." The next few minutes in the bridal suite turned into chaos as wedding guests crowded the doorway, whispering and pointing. Lily's mom sat in a chair, still in her wedding dress, speaking quietly with two FBI agents. The reality of what had almost happened was starting to sink in for everyone. Annie, the wedding planner, was trying to manage the crowd while coordinating with the venue staff. "Please everyone, step back. Give them some space." Her usually calm voice had an edge of panic to it. Through the window, more police cars were arriving, their lights reflecting off the polished floors. Lily watched as her mom handed her phone to one of the agents, showing them the evidence they'd discovered. "He tried to add his name to all my accounts," her mom explained, her voice trembling. "The paperwork was ready to be filed right after the ceremony." The agent nodded, taking notes. "You're not the first," she said gently. "He's been doing this for years. Different names, different cities, but always the same pattern. You're actually the first ones to catch him before he could complete the con." A commotion in the hallway drew everyone's attention. David had broken free from the security guards and was making a run for it. He shoved past the shocked guests, his perfectly tailored tuxedo now disheveled, his true nature finally visible to everyone. "Stop him," someone shouted. The wedding photographer, who had been quietly documenting everything, stuck out his foot as David ran past. David stumbled, crashing into a table of champagne glasses. The sound of shattering crystal mixed with gasps from the onlookers. Two police officers tackled him before he could get up. As they handcuffed him, David's eyes locked with Lily's. The charm was completely gone now, replaced by cold fury. "You ruined everything," he spat. "I had it all planned out perfectly." Lily stood her ground, even as her heart raced. "You ruined it yourself," she said firmly. "Did you really think you could fool everyone forever?" Her mom stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Lily's shoulder. "I want to see his other aliases," she told the FBI agent. "There might be more victims we can help." As the police led David away, Kai appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath. He'd been waiting outside with the final pieces of evidence they'd uncovered. "I heard everything," he said, handing a folder to the agents. "Here's all the research we did. There are at least 5 other cases we found." The grand ballroom below was still set up for the wedding that would never happen. Through the open doors, Lily could see guests milling around uncertainly, their celebration turned into something entirely different. "I should go talk to everyone," her mom said, smoothing her dress. But her hands were shaking too badly to fix the buttons. "Let me help." Annie stepped forward, her wedding planner instincts kicking in. "We can turn this into a different kind of gathering. A celebration of truth, maybe, and courage." Lily's mom managed a small smile. "A celebration of having a daughter who pays attention," she said, pulling Lily close. "Who trusts her instincts?" The FBI agents were packing up their notes. "We'll need both of you to come down to the station later to give formal statements," one of them said. "But for now, take some time with your family and friends. You've been through a lot." Looking around the room, Lily saw a mix of emotions on everyone's faces: shock, relief, and something like admiration. Her favorite teacher, Mrs. Cooper, stepped forward from the crowd. "You used everything we learned in class about investigation and critical thinking," she said proudly. "You probably saved your mom from losing everything." The weight of what had almost happened hit Lily suddenly. Her knees felt weak as she sank into a nearby chair. "Mom, I was so scared you wouldn't believe me," she whispered. "That you think I was just trying to ruin your happiness." Her mom knelt beside her, wedding dress pulling around her feet. "Honey, you are my happiness. Everything else, the business, the money, even this wedding, none of it matters compared to you." Annie cleared her throat softly. "The caterers want to know what to do with all the food. And the band is still here. Maybe we could turn this into a different kind of party. A thank you celebration for everyone who helped uncover the truth." Lily's mom looked around at their gathered friends and family, all the people who had come to share what they thought would be her special day. "You know what? That's exactly what we should do. Because today, we still have something amazing to celebrate, the love between a mother and daughter that no con man could fool." As Annie began redirecting the staff and guests, Lily heard snippets of conversation around her. People were already calling it the wedding that became a sting operation and the best non-wedding ever. Despite everything, she felt a surge of pride. They had stopped David from hurting anyone else. Her mom squeezed her hand. "Ready to go face everyone?" Lily nodded, standing up straighter. Together, they walked toward the door, ready to tell their story to the waiting crowd. Behind them, the sun streamed through the windows, making her mom's wedding dress sparkle, not with the promise of a false future, but with the strength of a truth finally revealed. 3 months after the wedding that wasn't, Lily sat beside her mom in the courthouse, watching as David, now known by his real name, Thomas Reed, faced the judge. The courtroom was packed with victims from other cities who had flown in to see justice served. Some of them had lost everything to his schemes. He operated under 12 different identities across 6 states, the prosecutor explained to the court, using the same pattern each time, targeting successful businesswomen through charity events and social functions, gaining their trust, and then vanishing with their assets. Lily's mom reached for her hand as the prosecutor detailed the charges. The list seemed endless: fraud, identity theft, money laundering. But what struck Lily most were the small details: how he used the same lines on every victim, planned the same romantic gestures, even bought similar engagement rings. One of the victims from Chicago, a restaurant owner, turned around and mouthed thank you to Lily. They had learned that after Lily exposed David's true identity, several of his previous victims had been able to recover some of their stolen assets that he had hidden in offshore accounts. The defendant preyed on the trust and hope of women who had worked hard to build successful lives, the prosecutor continued. But his final attempt was stopped by the attention and courage of a teenage girl who refused to ignore the warning signs. The judge, a stern-faced woman with kind eyes, looked directly at Lily as the prosecutor explained how she had gathered evidence and protected her mom. "Young lady," the judge said, "your actions show wisdom beyond your years." During a break in the proceedings, Lily and her mom stepped into the hallway. The marble floors echoed with footsteps as other victims gathered around them, sharing their stories. Each one was different, yet painfully similar. "I can't believe we all fell for the same act," one woman said, shaking her head. "The charitable donations, the business meetings that always ran late, the emergency phone calls. We believed because we wanted to believe," Lily's mom replied softly. "But thanks to my daughter, he won't be able to hurt anyone else." Back in the courtroom, David's lawyer attempted to paint him as a misunderstood businessman who had simply made poor decisions. But the evidence was overwhelming. The FBI had uncovered storage units in 3 cities filled with fake IDs, prepaid phones, and documents from his previous cons. When the judge announced the sentence, 15 years in federal prison plus restitution to all victims, a collective sigh of relief swept through the courtroom. David's perfectly maintained facade finally crumpled completely as he was led away in handcuffs. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered around the victims, but most of them wanted to talk to Lily. She had become something of a local hero, and her story had inspired other people to trust their instincts when things didn't add up. "What made you first suspect something was wrong?" a reporter asked. Lily thought about it. "It wasn't one big thing," she explained. "It was lots of small things that didn't make sense, like puzzle pieces that looked right at first glance but didn't quite fit." That evening, Lily and her mom sat on their back porch, watching the sunset. The wedding flowers that had decorated their house had long since wilted, but new ones, bought by her mom herself, brightened the kitchen window. "I've been thinking," her mom said, sipping her tea. "Remember how you used your criminology class knowledge to figure everything out? Maybe you should consider a career in law enforcement or criminal justice." Lily smiled. She'd already started researching college programs in forensic psychology. The FBI agent who worked their case had even offered to write her a recommendation letter. "You know what's funny?" her mom continued. "I always thought I was supposed to be the one teaching you about life. Instead, you taught me one of the most important lessons, that love means paying attention and trusting your gut." Their doorbell rang. It was Kai, carrying a stack of college brochures and his laptop. He'd become a regular visitor as they worked together to help the other victims piece together their cases against David. "You won't believe this," he said, opening his laptop. "Remember that charity foundation David claimed to run? The real owners want to start a program to help educate people about romance scams and financial fraud. They want you both to be guest speakers." Lily looked at her mom, who nodded encouragingly. They had promised each other to turn this experience into something positive, to help others avoid the same trap. "Life's funny sometimes," a mom said, making room for Kai to sit. "What started as the worst day of my life turned into something meaningful. We've helped other women reclaim their lives, you found your calling, and our bond is stronger than ever." As they sat there planning their first presentation, Lily realized something important. The wedding that never happened had given them something far more valuable than a new family member. It had shown them the strength of the family they already had. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang, reminding Lily of that fateful day. But now, instead of warning bells, they sounded like victory chimes, celebrating truth, justice, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and daughter who had faced deception together and emerged stronger.